Hey everyone, welcome to Contentious, the podcast about B2B marketing from the team here at Radix Communications. This is episode 4. Thank you if you've stuck with us thus far, and welcome if it is your first time listening in. The eagle-eyed amongst you, if you're watching this on video, may have noticed that we have a new co-host with us this week. Steve has moved on to great and exciting dream job things, so we will miss him terribly. But fortunately, we are unusually well stocked with copywriters with heaps of experience in B2B marketing. So I have done not quite a one-to-one swap, but a really good alternative in my co-host, George Reith. Welcome to Contentious. It is great to have you here.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. And may I say how fortunate it was for you that when you went, I need another co-host who's a man with a beard, who's also a copywriter and has opinions, you just had a lot of options. I'm glad I was the one you chose, though. It's nice. I'm glad to be here.
Well, the fact you can use the platform was really helpful. So
Sure. I mean, I'm just the tech guy at this point, but might as well put me in front of the camera while I'm here.
Heaven forbid I learn to use a new tool. But yeah, George, if you could give our lovely listeners a little insight into who you are and how long you've been here, that kind of thing.
Sure, I can. So I'm a senior copywriter with Radix, and I have been working with the company for 14 years come this August, which is quite a big number. It's been a wild ride, let me tell you. So yeah, I've seen quite a few things change over the years, both within Radix and how it operates, but also the broader industry and where tech is.
The nice thing about having George here with me is I feel like me and Steve come from quite similar positions on things, and I think you and I have like a slightly different way of looking at things.
I knew you chose me as an agent of chaos. I knew you were like, this guy's going to throw a spanner in the works.
I felt like we needed more drama.
Yeah,
for sure.
Who wants two people agreeing on a podcast? That's terrible.
Exactly. People are here for arguments, and we didn't call this contentious for nothing.
Well, there we go.
So, in the spirit of getting opinions and sharing opinions, last month we had a chat about the so-called death of the funnel, whether customer journeys, buyer journeys are looking different in the age of AI, all this sort of stuff. My opinion that I really settled on was possibly that, much like other pleasant visual metaphors, the funnel never really existed, and it just sort of was a convenient way of describing something that was quite hard to pin down. And then we've all heard my zoo metaphor, and if you haven't, please go listen to me embarrass myself in episode 3. But George, by way of introducing you to the podcast, I'd love to know, what's your view? How do you feel about the funnel?
Here we go. Hot take time. I'm about to drop some bombs. No, I'm not. It's a pretty standard opinion. I think it was interesting hearing you guys chat about it, because the moment this topic came up, I thought about Steve's piece he did about the water slide thing, which obviously you discussed in detail. But the funny thing was, looking back on that, right? That water slide thing Steve did was like 2018 or something. Like, this was quite a while ago he wrote this piece. And I think the fact that it was so relevant then, and it's even more relevant now, right? Like, I think the funnel as a concept has never really been alive in the sense that this is exactly how audiences become engaged with a brand. I remember working with a client around that era in 2018, 2017 maybe, and they were quite new to managing a whole marketing function in their organization. They'd come from like a specific area, I think it was SEO or something. And so they were looking at the whole content thing for the first time. We were doing an audit. And they did say to me, like, are you seriously telling me you think someone's going to read 3 specific pieces of content and like, that's it, they're converting? And I was kind of like, well, obviously not. And it did make me question the whole metaphor, because I was like, well, he's got me there that obviously that sounds really daft. Like, I'm not ruling out that could ever happen. If you had 3 absolute dynamite pieces of content in each stage of the funnel, maybe it does work like that. I'm a little skeptical though. However, it is incredibly useful when you're doing a content audit, like I was then, for looking at it and going, well, you have absolutely nothing that's under like 900 words. So you probably need something that's just going to invite people into the topic. Maybe they've never heard of you. They can take a couple of seconds to look at a cool infographic in a way they might not with an ebook, right? So that as a way of framing the conversation, the funnel is like timeless and extremely useful. But I think especially, I know you guys touched on some of that research you found about people jumping between devices so rapidly in the way they engage with media, both as consumers and business people. It is so different now to how it was even when I started the job, that I think, the funnel as a model for how people engage with stuff is very, very loose now. And, I don't really have an answer for what it looks like now. I don't think there's an amazing metaphor. I sort of feel it is just like attention economy 101, isn't it? Of like, just how can you hold people's attention for more than like 10 seconds at a time? The answer is you don't, which is why TikTok exists. I'm not really giving a great answer there, but what I'm trying to say is, I guess, I think the funnel's been dead for a long time as it's written, but I think as a way of looking at an overall content strategy, I still think it's very useful for just picking apart those sections of like awareness, consideration, evaluation, that kind of thing. I think it still has a place, absolutely. But I think, yeah, the way people engage with brands is no doubt changing, and I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how it's all going to settle down. I sort of feel like we might have a weird reversal. Like I think people will get fed up with really short form things, and we'll go back to everybody wanting these insanely meaty white paper PDFs with no images. Like I wonder if we'll just have a complete knee-jerk reaction. What, you're trying to send me an ebook with an image? No, I don't want that. That's for kids. I want a dense 5,000 word technical manual. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know.
Yeah, if anyone wants to give me a project that's just 300 words per page, no box outs, no anything else, I would love that. I think that would really exercise a bit of my brain that I don't get to use very often these days. I think if you do think about the funnel more as layers and the kind of shape of it in terms of the volume of people you can expect to stick with you for that long, they're not going on that little neat slide down there, unless of course they are like the perfect person and you've given them the perfect stuff. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know how you'd draw what a funnel really looks like. It might just be a case of dropping a plate of spaghetti on the floor, and however that winds up is representative, maybe. I think it's pretty tricky, but also useful. I think anything that doesn't serve us quite in the way it's intended is probably still quite useful for something else. And I love that you're talking about content audits, because I think that we might swing back around
might
to
come
the
up
concept
later. Sure,
in a minute.
Yeah, that's part of the
Lucky
theme.
us.
Yeah.
I love a neat segue. So yes, we are going to move on to our core topic for today, which is a little more back to stuff we were talking about in the first couple of episodes. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, Claude went down earlier this week. It was very dramatic. There were lots of think pieces within seconds and a lot of very grumpy people on LinkedIn. But it did get me thinking about the sustainability of content production processes that rely on things like that, where you need to have good data center uptime. You're kind of combining it now with some of the changes that companies like Anthropic and OpenAI are making to their services, where your token limits are smaller, tokens are more expensive. As people launch more agents that kind of autonomously use tokens, they're eating up a lot of people's allowances. Some of them are being taken by surprise by how quickly that's happening. And I think, we talk about the pressure to do more with less, or much more with almost zero. This is not new. This is antique. We were talking about this earlier, and it's something that marketers have been under pressure for a really, really long time. And I think we acknowledge that AI has been quite a lifeline for a lot of marketers that are expected to hit a certain volume of content. But if it is becoming less practical to use things like Claude in these ways, what else can you do? My feeling is that you go and harken back to some classic approaches to doing more with less. But George, let's go to you. What's your view?
Cool. So we have some ideas for how you can do this. But I think, the go-to answer in the modern era is that people are going to want to use AI, right? They're already using it in lots of marketing functions. It's proving really useful for a lot of tasks for people. I've been having conversations with clients about this as well. If I say you shouldn't use AI, I'm sure a lot of people are going to hear that and roll their eyes and go, another copywriter who fears the technological revolution. And there's an element of that. However, when I've had these conversations with clients, I've been really trying not to trigger that thought within them, because I think it would be really obvious for me to say you shouldn't use it, you should use me/Radix instead, right? But I think there are quite a lot of very legitimate reasons to very carefully consider how to use AI in content creation processes, especially. And the main ones I've been focusing is like, it's been funny talking to the rest of the team about this as well. When this first came up in conversation with a client, I spoke to a couple of members of the team, and a lot of them came from a very writer perspective, and they were like, it's about the soul of the piece, man. It's about and that is true. But I was also like, if I tell that to like a CMO, they're just going to look at me and be like, well, it's not like they don't care, but it's sort of like, well, we need to do all this stuff.
The soul does not bring in money.
Exactly. Like, it's not going to generate this return on our investment in marketing. It's not going to get us results necessarily. However, interestingly, all the stats I've found on this are kind of saying that, in general, human generated content is actually performing better than a lot of AI generated stuff, like quite significantly. Now, we have to take these stats with a little bit of a pinch of salt, of course, because even though there is a lot of AI generated stuff already in the 4 years since AI tools have become widely available, it's still crazy. It's something like, isn't it something like 90% of the top search results on Google are human generated and like 10% is AI stuff? It's something like that. I think I remember reading.
Somewhere around that. I think they're trying to nudge you more, particularly on Google, towards the AI stuff now. But
I mean, Google's laid a strategy out for that, right, already. Sure. And but the reality is, like, there's some stuff here where it just doesn't perform as well as human generated content. And every marketing department is going to need to weigh up the cost of hiring humans to do this stuff versus the potential return. But fundamentally, if your goal is to get really good results, is to get conversions, is to get leads, human written stuff is still the best way to do that. Unfortunately for your budget, perhaps, but that is the reality. So from a pure efficacy point of view, that's also the case. But I'd also invite people to consider the process, because we've long said that the first draft is like absolutely the beginning of a process with content, right? Like, there's lots of amends that need to be taken care of. The issue with the process of edits in the world of AI, of course, is that if an AI generates an output, some of them are pretty good that you can talk to your AI and go, okay, well, I need you to like rewrite this specific paragraph to make the tone more formal, or we need to talk about this audience in a different way. Can you reframe the conversation? And they'll do it. But some also kind of just chuck the baby out with the bathwater, because it's obviously a probabilistic output. You do get that issue where you want to change small things in a draft, and it just bucks it all out and starts again, because that's kind of how these engines run, right? And that's not massively useful in terms of a writing and content creation process of nailing down and iterating on a draft. So that's also a little bit problematic. I think, though, the real smoking gun for me is one of audience trust that needs to be really carefully considered.
Sure.
And the two sides of this I've been looking at specifically are like, so anecdotally, I spend a little bit of time on Reddit. I'm one of those people. I'm really sorry. I know it's a bit of a stereotype, isn't it?
Probably already knew, yeah.
Yeah, I give that vibe. Sorry. Anyway, I spend a lot of time on Reddit talking to people about movies and video games and stuff like that. And let me tell you, whenever there's a whiff of AI, these guys hate it. Like, they are people who are like really angry. I mean, like, I'm hearing reports in like the United States particularly, because a lot of data center sort of stuff is being built there and planned there at the moment. There are people trying to set fire to data centers. Like, people are not happy about a lot of this stuff for a lot of reasons, right? Now, I'm not going to cast aspersions on whether this is right or wrong behavior. Some people are calling it knee-jerk hysteria. Some people say it's right to be skeptical of AI in creative works, of course. All I'm going to say is, though, there's a lot of people who you potentially alienate if something is really clearly AI generated. And, I found a stat somewhere, I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, when they did studies around this and they got control groups in and then got other groups to kind of test whether they could identify if something was AI on site, it's about 50-50. Like, 50% of people are pretty accurate in being able to look at a piece of text and go, yep, ChatGPT did it, or Claude did it. And so that's like, you're not fooling half of that audience, right? And if they don't like it, you've kind of just lost that audience completely. And the trust that you lose that way is pretty extreme. And also the final bit on trust as well is, like, if you're a company like many that has a sustainability policy and an ESG kind of ambition, the sustainability implications of AI immediately make that quite icky. If you have like a strong commitment to sustainability and it's in your corporate reporting, and then you're also clearly using a tool that takes up a lot of electricity, a lot of water, and has a lot of impact on the environment, people might really be asking questions about how honest you are in your ESG principles. And I think that's completely fair of them to ask. And if you don't have an answer for that, you might need to think carefully about whether you want to be using AI quite so much in your content. Now, I don't want to say you shouldn't use it at all. I think there are places where it can be useful. But I think if you're going to be using it as like your instant kind of switch, like, I need to get this done and I don't have loads of budget and resources, I need to turn to AI, I'd consider some of these points and just maybe take a pause and see if there's other ways you could be doing it that aren't going to have those risks associated with it.
Thinking about that trust component, which is a really big one for me. Firstly, I think if somebody's coming into your content with a natural bit of skepticism, which people with money to spend will be, because they want to make sure they're putting their money in the right places, they're not going to generally let themselves be easily swayed. They're probably going to be paying closer attention to the kind of flags that people notice. Quite a while back, we did a little exercise where Matt went through some examples that were AI generated, that were AI generated, human tweaked, AI outline, human written, that kind of thing. And we had a pure human written one. And he was pretty spot on, really quite tuned into it. And I know that's our benefit as writers, but for every person that's firebombing data centers, or like at the full end of the spectrum, a full evangelist. You have millions more people that are at best lukewarm about it, that kind of waver depending on how it's being used, this kind of thing. Like, most people are not at those extremes of the spectrum, but they're going to sit somewhere, and it doesn't take much to nudge people in either direction. Certainly the more negative direction is an easier way to nudge people if you're not careful. And
That's
to your
a
point,
really strong point about people coming in with skepticism in B2B world, right? Because I don't know why, you just made me think of something. Did you see this thing that was doing the rounds? It was a social media video, and it was like in a care home, and it was like old people. I can't remember what they were doing, but it was something really heartwarming. You know, people were like really like, oh, this is so cute. And then it came out that it was all AI generated, and loads of people were really upset, right? And I kind of had this thought to myself of like, how do so many people not notice the tells in a video like that? Because normally videos, I think one of the places where it's possibly easiest to spot the thumbprint of AI on it. And I think it's because people really wanted to believe it, right? You know, they wanted this heartwarming thing. They were like, oh, I want to believe that all the old people are baking amazing cakes, and that's what they do in old folks' homes. You know, they had a sort of willingness to participate in the fantasy, right? But in a sales or marketing cycle, they don't. Like, they are looking for something that's wrong with your product. They don't want to spend the money and risk it if it's not going to be exactly right. So you'll have procurement people looking through this, and they are just desperate to find something that nullifies it. You know, they're going to be coming in with a high burden of skepticism that you will need to clear. And I mean, I have to imagine that a single hallucination or incorrect statement would just torpedo your chances with that group, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen something very similar, which is, I think, shelter dogs picking people as their new owners, which is obviously like, this is all stuff that's really keyed into making you cry a bit. I can watch a video of a real dog and cry. I don't need an AI generated dog to make me cry. But like you said, you know, it's a nice thing. You want to buy into the vibe and the fantasy of it. But yeah, if you are trying to cover your company and make sure you're making a good decision, you can't really afford to be expending it on a brand you don't fully trust. But yeah, to your point about the human content being the most effective, we talked about that a little bit in one of our other episodes as well, and maybe that being a downside for the budget. I think that brings us very nicely into one of my points, which we were chatting about a little bit. One of Steve's parting gifts to us was he put together a really lovely guide to kind of reusing, repurposing, and refreshing content. You can find that on our website through our LinkedIn if you're interested, and kind of gives some really, really classic ways of reusing content, but stuff that I think we tend to forget about because we're so focused on creating something new and fresh. And I get the impetus, but if you are looking at a really tight content budget, you don't necessarily want to go and use AI. You're still expected to hit volumes, bringing things back to life, and, you know, making the most of an old investment. Because yeah, most companies we speak to, our clients, are sitting on an absolute treasure trove of stuff that they've produced, or they brought us in to produce, other people in the industry have created, and it's just sitting there offering quite, I think, a valuable way into producing something fresh and pretty new without having to do the full cycle of ideation, of planning, of writing, all this kind of stuff.
Because this was something we did recently, wasn't it, Katy? And I know you were involved in that for Radix, because Radix has obviously been, you know, doing its own blog for a very long time, but we've had a marked shift in sort of who we are aiming at, because for a long time it was like tips for other writers, but then we're sort of like, well, it'd be better to talk to content marketers who do we actually work with. But then obviously a lot of stuff that we'd written that was like how to use a comma, you know, they don't really want to know that. So we wound up doing this whole program that I know you were involved in, sort of assessing what we had, working out what needed to be rewritten. I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about that.
Yes, so this is where the content audit comes back in, and I'll just get the plug in now. Please give me content audits to do. I adore them. They are such a good project because, I mean, nothing gives you an overview of a brand and how they talk and what they care about quite like digging through all of their content. It's like full immersion. But what we did was we took a really quite brutal approach, a very like heavily stratified approach to looking back through everything we produced, and like you said, looking at stuff that doesn't speak to the people we most care about, who are marketers, the people we're trying to support and like help them get stuff done. Yeah, like you said, the semicolon is not particularly interesting to them. It's just stuff we know, And it's, probably reassuring that we do understand these things, but it doesn't mean we need to have a blog about it. So we, had a really quite brutal cutting, essentially. We culled a lot of content. I think our, multiple pages worth of content left our website when we did our rebrand last year. But what this also does, and our colleague John is now doing the second wave of this, which is a little bit more focused on this kind of repurposing and refreshing angle, is it becomes really obvious what content you have, what's worth exploring, what's worth going back to, and kind of unpicking something, going, is this a topic that we still care about? Is it something we have something new to say about? Is this worth going back and revisiting with a critical eye, and will it be helpful to, our ultimate audience for us to revisit these topics? And we're doing that with quite a few other clients at the moment as well, because it is a really, I think, underrated way of building out new content and giving yourself a chance to speak about the most important topics, and also clock gaps in what you've been talking about. I think that's really valuable. If you've been talking about one thing a lot, have you exhausted that? Maybe park it. But then are there series where you've touched on a bunch of interesting things and the conversation's moved on and there's stuff to go back to and fill in the gaps? I think that stuff is all really valuable. And I think, George, you've probably heard this stat. Everyone's probably heard this stat. I'm not going to put a number to it because I genuinely think it's one of those ghost or zombie stats about how little content actually sees the light of day.
I know this one. Yeah. Never found a source for it. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, there's it's variously tiny numbers about how much B2B content sees the light of day, and I'm sure anyone listening has heard this one too. But anecdotally, quite a lot of projects do get shelved. We've seen that. We've seen things that make it almost up to final approval and then don't quite make it. But whether it's 97% or something, less terrifying as a number, that content is sitting somewhere. Not all of it will have aged well. Not all of it is worth revisiting. And I think partially there's like a slight post-mortem approach to working out exactly why something didn't make it into final production. But all that's still there. It's still on a hard drive somewhere, unless you're one of those people that has better file management than I do. Have a dig, have a look through, be brutal about what you keep and what you don't keep, but there's always it's like a leg up, right, to getting content done if you have the groundwork of something, even if it turns into something completely different. I'm curious, George, if you have ways of repurposing and refreshing content that you're particularly fond of.
Fond of is a strong word. I do have some thoughts about the process in general, though, because actually, even before this big sort of mega refresh you and John have been working on, there was a mini one we did where we just cut a lot of stuff that just clearly wasn't it. And I had a few blogs that I'd written like years and years ago for Radix, kind of thrown at me like, this one did quite well, but you wrote it in 2015. Like, that's not going to cut it now, right? The world's moved on a little bit. This topic's evolved. Can you have another look at it? And initially, when this landed on my desk, I was there like, here we go. This is going to be an ordeal. And actually, it wasn't too bad because it was a fully formed piece. It had come out. It had a decent amount of traction. People were reading it. And a lot of the times, some stuff required quite a lot of rethinking, but it was still a lot quicker than writing a whole new piece of content from scratch. Others, though, it was just like a tiny thing where I looked through it and I like referenced a couple of analytics technologies that basically just no longer existed because just things had moved on. They'd been acquired and bought up by somebody else. And that, that took like minutes to refresh that in a way that sort of was suitable for 2024 or whenever it was I was doing this exercise. So yeah, I think there's sometimes a reticence to reuse content because the thought is it's been so long since X piece of content was relevant. We're basically just starting from scratch. It's going to be a whole thing. We're going to have to restart again, basically. And I was surprised to find that in this case of me doing about a dozen or so blogs, that was rarely the case. It was significantly quicker just to sort of fix what was there already, rather than starting from scratch. Very different experience for our internal blog compared to like what clients are doing, what marketing managers are having to do in terms of balancing their resources. But I think if you are stretched thin and you need to find a way to get some new content out, it can be a really good way of doing it without maxing out your budget.
Well, that feels like a nice, neat place to wrap up for now. We would As always, love to hear from you guys listening about how you are stretching that budget. Is it something that you are leaning on AI to do? Is it something that you're kind of reining in your content ambitions for? Or are you, like us, looking back at some of your earlier pieces and seeing what gems are hidden in there? We will be putting out a poll. Feel free to comment wherever you see this. Feel free to drop us a message and give us your view as well. We will be back next month with our recap and our new topic as always. From us, thank you so much for listening. George, thank you for stepping into the role as co-host, and I look forward to doing this again next month.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it as well.
I hope it's been a gentle introduction to the world of the podcast.
It's been absolutely magical, Katy, is what it's been.
That's what we like to hear.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me air my unhinged opinions. I look forward to offering them again next time. Can't wait.
Thank you so much, everyone, and we will be speaking to you next month.